What is going on? Drew, Nick, Daniel, what up? Chilling, man. Chilling. $7:29. Give that 30-second countdown. Officer Julian, what up? Carbo, what up? Lordy, what up? Carbone, thank you for commenting on my hat. It's my quarantine. I'm standing in solidarity with my barber vibe right now because, I could just kind of do the thing, but you got to stand with solidarity. All right, 7:30. We're going to go ahead and jump in just because, one, we want to honor people's times. Before he would perform, he would build the suspense. That's fascinating. But we want to honor people's times, but then also, just what can we say? So let me frame the time like this. First, this is not going to be just like a sermon, like, just kind of talking at people. That's just not what I'm here for, nor is that the space that we want to create. This is going to be interactive, so you post questions there, and we'll be able to engage with those questions. I know several people has already sent questions in, and so we're actually going to work our way through some of the questions that were sent in. But before we do that, I wanted to frame tonight, and then what we hope to accomplish Thursday as well. So, if I could summarize the last week and a half, it would be that scene from Infinity War, and so, Thanos is marching across the universe, trying to bring balance, and he gets back to his home planet, and as he's at his home planet, he meets Doctor Strange, and Doctor Strange is sitting down. They're having an eye-to-eye confrontation, and he's like, "Where's the mall?" I'm assuming he's dead, and he's like, "Yes," and he's like, "Man, this day extracts a heavy toll." And he had just got through killing his daughter, Gamora. If you haven't seen the movie, shame on you, because Infinity War is glorious. But there was just like boom, 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 boom. It was one thing after another that it just kept stacking. And Thanos was like, "Man, I'm done." And this last week and a half has really been that in my mind for myself, but then also for so many different people that I've talked to. It's felt like it was one thing after another, after another, after another, and it was like this collision of emotional, spiritual exhaustion. And what we were saying was like, man, if we were in different circumstances where we could just, not have to be socially distanced, but we could actually engage face to face, we would have called an audible, brought everybody together, maybe kicked it at my house, or open up the church building. Let's just have a conversation about where people are in terms of some emotional, healthy spirituality issues. But since we can't do that currently, we're like, well, we still need to have a conversation. We still need to engage. So let's kind of do this. So the idea was to create space so that we could process what has been difficult for so many people. Now, the catalyst for a large amount of people was what took place with Ahmaud Arbery. So that was a catalyst, but that wasn't the only thing that was taking place. In the last 72 hours, a pastor who was influential for so many people, especially in my generation, he passed. And that, I mean, just the nature of death, and then some other stuff that's even happened in the life of our church and in our lives personally. And what we said is like that we need to talk about lament, and we need to talk about grief, not because we don't talk about it as a church. Those aren't things that are foreign to us, but because it's in these moments where we need to add more volume to our voice and how we engage and how we speak on it. And so really tonight and then Thursday is going to be an expansive conversation around lament. Thursday is going to be heavily geared towards what's the relationship between anger and lament, specifically when you're angry around injustice. And we're going to get into that, but I don't want to fully talk about that because we got a guest that's coming Thursday. But tonight, really we just want to talk about suffering and the nature of grief. How do we process it? How are we currently processing it? And we'll walk through some of the questions that y'all sent in. First, a definition of lament. Lament is a passionate expression of grief or sorrow. Lament is when the inside of your soul is affected by what's going on around you. Like the inside of your world, the world inside you is affected by the world outside you, so much so that there's this intense emotion that you feel in the depths of your being. And that intense emotion, that intense feeling shows up as grieving or sorrow or expressing some level of sadness, lament. So that's the nature of lament. It is this passionate expression of grief or sorrow from the depths of your inner world. All right? Now, what it's not is emotionalism. It's not like I'm just running around like waxing eloquent with my emotions or just emotionally vomiting on people. That's not necessarily the essence of lament. That may be an expression of it, but the essence is there's something that is deeply occurring inside of you that can't be contained. So it spills over into the world around you and how you're starting to express yourself. And at the core of that is emotional, healthy spirituality. It's the ability to understand that emotions aren't negative or neutral. They're positive because God designed them and God expresses them. Emotions aren't negative or neutral, they're positive. And they can be attached and applied to negative things, but inherently they're not neutral and they're not negative. And so the core of lament is this emotional, spiritual tension and dynamic where we just feel. What brings us to lament is suffering. Suffering brings us to lament. Now, suffering exists on a scale, right? It's not one size fits all. Pain is relative and it's also proportionate. But suffering brings everybody to the same place, which is lament. In suffering, we ask questions. Why? And this is not, if somebody asks those questions, we'll maybe get into that. But again, I feel zero pressure to give a comprehensive theological explanation about suffering. There's sermons for that. Go follow us, all right? That's not it. We're just talking. But when we suffer, why is a natural question. What I've learned in suffering is why is a natural question. It's also the default question, but it's not necessarily the primary question. Like the primary question isn't why suffering. The primary question is who's in control when suffering takes place. That's the primary. Right alongside that is not just the who's in control, but how then will we respond in the midst of suffering. The primary question is not what's the purpose behind it, but are there promises that we could hold on to in light of it? right? So now one promise we can hold on in light of suffering is that God may not give you the purpose, but he will promise to be present in the midst of it. Another promise we can hold on to is that if you know Jesus, he may not remove suffering from you, but he'll protect and persevere and be present with you. He groans with us. He groans with our groanings. There's this passage that's been rocking me lately. It's like Isaiah 42, and it talks about how the Lord's chosen servant. I'll read it if you're okay with that. Where's my Bible? I ain't preaching, but man, if I just gotta read it. Isaiah 42, 1-3. Behold my servant, whom I uphold, my elect, in whom my soul delights. I've put my spirit upon him. He shall bring forth justice to the Gentiles. He shall not cry, nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed shall he not break, and a smoking flax shall he not quench. He shall bring forth justice unto truth. And man, it's just been something that I've been just like clinging to lately. Is like that God sees us in our groanings and in our lament, and he's gentle with us. Like a bruised reed is a soul that's been touched by misery, and God doesn't interact with us in a forceful way. He's tender in our misery. He's tender in our suffering. He groans with us. But then that other part of that is he's a God that executes justice. More on that. And so we just wanted to frame that. If you're listening to this, if you are checking this out, it's probably because there's some emotional, spiritual stuff that's happened in your heart in the last week, specifically with some of the killings that have just reached their boiling point and have taken the life of another brother in America. And it's like, man, I'm tired. I am exhausted. And I know some people are as well. And some people, it's like, man, they're grieving the loss of a friend. And they're grieving the loss of a pastor figure. And so if you're here, you're experiencing some of that emotional oomph. And what we wanted to say is, hey, you don't have to experience that alone. And you don't have to be the only voice in your life that's shaping your experience. Because if you're the only voice in your life shaping your experience, what that means is that voice is probably not the Lord's. Because if the Lord is the voice in your life shaping that experience, that means he's going to be moving you into community where others are able to come alongside and add weight to what's going on. Weight in the form of tears, going to cry with you, or weight in the form of truth. Hey man, consider this way. So some people have sent some questions in light of suffering, but then also what took place with Ahmaud. If you're not familiar with what took place, then I would say research it, be plugged into the culture, into the world around you. Don't detach. It's crazy. So somebody asked this. They said, in situations like this, so where somebody was essentially publicly lynched, murdered, out for a jog. So in situations like this, do you experience a dichotomy of identity? Meaning, as a pastor, are you supposed to respond in one way, but as a black man, you may feel like you want to respond differently? That's a very great question. The answer to that question is absolutely yes. I don't think that's unique necessarily to me. I think any African American pastor in situations like this has a weird tension that they experience, because part of the African American experience in America is to exist with that tension of a double conscience, where it feels like you're living in multiple worlds, and there's this dominant narrative, this dominant majority culture that's trying to assert authority over what it looks like to be you. And so there's this weird, W. Du Bois, this weird tension that you have as an African American in America, the double conscience. And so yes is the short answer. To build it out, what does that tension look like? There's a part of me, like as a black man, that just wants to rage. I just want to rage, like, stop killing us. You know, like, Stop covering the killing of black people, of brown people. Stop covering it up. Stop trying to speak charitably to why it's quote unquote a sin issue and not a sin issue named racism. Like I just don't have the energy for that right now. And so there's that part of me as a black man that just wants to just rage and say, yo, that's not helpful, shut up. All right, so yes, there's that part of me. Then there's this pastoral part of me that wants to rage, but wants to rage with like truth guiding it and more prophetic tone, and saying like, hey man, like what I have noticed, and I saw James Roberson and Carly hop on here, and maybe they could speak to this as well. I was talking to a friend of mine about this last week. But what I've noticed is, what it seems like is that for every one black or brown body that is a victim of injustice in America, it seems like there's a dozen more black or brown people that walk away from Jesus. Like that's kind of the math that I've seen, that for every one black or brown body that's a victim of injustice, there's a dozen black or brown people that walk away from Jesus. That it feels like this becomes the thing that pushes people over the edge to leave, you know? And so so pastorally, like there's this tension to say, no, I gotta go confront this, because the effects aren't just in somebody's everyday experience, they're gonna show up in their eternal destination. So I totally feel that tension, but then also I feel that tension because pastorally there's a caricature that exists for pastors, and so they're supposed to be theologians alone, which is crazy because theology is functional. Like theology is not an academic exercise, it's an exercise of our affections. So everybody does theology. We all have thoughts about God, and then we organize them in a systematic way. And so it's an exercise of the heart and not just the mind of our academics. And so, but the caricature is that pastors should just speak to things regarding quote unquote theological realms. But that's foolish. And so there's that tension that if you apply theology into all of life, which we should do, because there's no square inch that God doesn't say mine. That's Psalm 24:1. If you do that, you get lumped into a particular camp. You're like one of those social justice warriors. Now, I really don't care anymore, because don't nobody own me, and I'm a grown man, like, you know what I mean? And my identity is secure. I will walk away from the organization, from this matrix that exists, and be good. But there's still that tension that exists with me. So to answer that question, yes, I feel that in situations like this in particular. Another question, aside from sin, duh, I didn't say duh, the question said duh. Why do you think this is a perpetual problem? Man, that's a good question. Also, this is along the lines of injustice in particular. Yeah, I think that the air we're breathing is the depth of expertise. So everybody's an expert. It's a do-it-yourself culture. It's a I go on YouTube or I Google it, and so now I become an expert regarding whatever topic. And so I say that to say, I think that we assume a level of anthropological wisdom and insight. So I think people think that they get people. If I can say that again, people think they get people, especially with the rise of personality tests and such. We just assume that we get people. So we're like armchair anthropologists. But because of that, because we actually don't grow in our anthropology, because we don't grow in understanding history and how history shapes humanity, because we're not growing in our awareness, I just don't think that we live in reality. And because we don't live in reality, it's easy to disengage, to just be like, yo, like, you know, I know what's going on, and then to disengage because you have some narrative, and so you're actually not part of the solution. So I personally think we just don't understand people well, but we think that we do because we're more arrogant. I think another reason is that, like, apart from sin, right? So sin is the reason for the brokenness in the world around us. So apart from just sin, I think another reason is, I think change doesn't really take place until it's personalized. Like, mentor of mine, friend of mine, used to always say, he's like, man, it's not really a problem until it's my problem. Brian Loritz, he said this one thing that I just thought was so profound. He said this. He said, until the pain of staying the same is more than the pain of changing, we will never change. Like, until the pain of staying the same is like more than the pain of changing, we will never change. And so there's this sense where staying the same isn't actually painful for us, because we haven't personalized the suffering of others. And because we haven't personalized the suffering of others, and we're removed from it, like, it's easy to just, again, exist like nothing is going on, to kind of exist in our own ecosystem, our own echo chamber, in our own world, detached from real community. So I would say that. I would say one is, I think that there is an assumption of wisdom as it relates to people. We think we're good anthropologists when in actuality we're not. And I think two, like, there's a comfort that we have because we haven't personalized suffering or other people's suffering. Another question. For those of us who have children, how do you begin to have this conversation? Great question. With honesty and humility. With honesty and humility. So we just started, well, I just started the sex talk with my son. He's 6, getting ready to be 7. And it was weird, man. I was sharing with some of my friends. Like, I didn't know I was going to have that conversation. We were just talking about life. And then, here we are talking about sex. So, okay. And it was just a conversation of honesty. Like, it was one of those things where what was driving the conversation wasn't fear. What was driving the conversation wasn't being voyeuristic. It wasn't sensualizing the conversation. It was just honesty and humility. And I think that's just the approach with parenting in general, is that we should have an honest posture, and that we should have a humble posture, that we don't know it all, but here's what we know. Let's walk towards a right outcome in light of what we know. So I think honesty and humility. So for us, we live in Miami, and Serenity, her school, is super diverse, but it's primarily Latino. And one of the conversations that we had to have early on was around her race and her ethnicity and her heritage, and some of the tension she was feeling, because she was like, man, why don't I have straight hair? Why is my hair not like everybody else's hair I see in my school? And then that weird, again, that double conscious, that weird tension she was feeling, that had her saying, man, I think we should move back to Atlanta. Can we go back to Atlanta? And the reason was because she was equating like Atlanta with a place where she could belong, because there's people who look like her. But as we started having a conversation and we just processed through God's plan and then just diversity, like, you could just see her spirits being lifted. So I think that honesty and humility is how you start having conversations with your children. And with issues that are so visceral like this, man, honesty, proactive honesty, like, to just be able to say, like, yo, like, this is not okay, but what's coming, God's promises, they're enough to cause us to hold on and to fight well. So that's what I would say. Let's see, another question. Man, yeah. If someone is struggling with sadness to the point where it really does overwhelm them spiritually, leads them to depression or defeat, what would you say to those people? Yeah, the first thing I would say to that person is, you're not crazy and you don't have to be alone. Yeah, that often we have trivialized the suffering that exists in the soul. Like, we just reduce it to, I don't know, man, like, you're just having a bad day, when it's like, nah, like we live in a fallen, broken world where things don't go well. We live in a world that doesn't meet our expectations. Like, everyone is touched by misery, but because we trivialize suffering, we don't really know how to handle it. And so it's created a culture where people suffer in silence more readily. You know, and so I would just say, man, you're not crazy, and you don't have to be alone. In fact, don't be alone. That it's very hard to say be courageous and share, but it's the very thing that would lead to greater health. So I would say, man, you're not crazy. You don't have to be alone. I think that suffering isn't um, static. I think it's very dynamic. There's different things that bring us to deep suffering and subsequently deep depression. And if you try and one size fits all your healing, like it just doesn't work. I think that's First Kings with Elijah, where Elijah was battling depression, and God engaged with him in a multifaceted way. He dealt with his physical man, hey, go eat something. He essentially dealt with his emotional man. He had him do like a truth journal. Why are you here? So that's a technique to ask questions, create awareness, to start to lead your heart, not just to listen to it, but to lead it. Why are you here? And then he spiritually addressed it. He said, like, let me open your eyes and show you what I'm doing. You know, he addressed it in a multifaceted way, because we're multifaceted people. So, yeah, I would say, man, if you feel overwhelmed, man, like, one, I'm sorry, but you're not crazy, and you don't have to be alone. Let me ask another question. Do you feel like in certain situations black males can bring things on themselves with their actions? I feel like in multiple situations people could bring stuff on themselves. Black, Hispanic, European, Asian. So I do think that people could bring things on themselves. I think that's the nature of personal responsibility. What I do not think is helpful, though, is to use that to justify the devaluing of black and brown lives that exist, in that it is clear that in certain situations there is something that exists in our culture. I'm going to say it's a demonic dynamic that exists in our culture that devalues black and brown lives to the point where the first response is fear and aggression. So yes, people bring stuff about themselves, but that is not an acceptable way to justify the regular killing of black and brown people by people who aren't black and brown. Like, that's just, we're not going to use that. Like, you know what I mean? But that's what's often used. And I just think that's problematic. So do people put themselves in situations that's problematic and bring stuff on themselves? Absolutely. Welcome to being human. However, does that justify what takes place in those situations? Not at all. Not at all. And we could build that out if somebody wants to ask a follow-up question with that. But while we wait for that, let me go to this other question. How would you love to see the Brook respond to this? This being suffering and then experiences of injustice. Yeah, man, I think the idea was that we would continue to be who we already are, which is a people who suffer well together and courageously push towards hope. I think that we would be who we already are, because here's what happens, and this is why I'm exhausted, but I don't feel like I'm out of control, right? So in situations like this, it feels like everybody wants to respond, and people want to respond publicly. You know, if I'm honest, like, and I think I said this, with IG, like, there was a lot of public responses from people, and it almost felt like posturing. It was like, man, this was a detestable attack, act, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? I know that the facts are still coming out. Man, I know that this is an open case. And honestly, all that stuff made me sick to my stomach. Because I'm like, this feels more like posturing for your constituents rather than just lamenting and just mourning. Like, this shouldn't have happened, period. No comma, no semicolon. This was wrong, period. So that's honestly how I felt. And that was a shared feeling by a lot of people. And what it led me to to quite honestly believe is this: if you use the energy not to speak publicly, but to take your phone and to go down your contact list and to go through every name and look at your names and say, you know what, that person is a racist, let me pray for them, and then call them, that would go farther than public statements. But in these moments, there just feels like there's this need to respond, and often the need to respond is because there's an absence of stuff happening on the ground relational level. And so for us, I feel like we do a lot of ground level relational work, and we do some of the more public stuff. And so I just feel like we should continue to be who we already are, which is a people where we suffer with others well. We don't come with all of the answers. We just come with shoulders and tears. But then we also push towards courageous hope. Man, like if we let rage rule and win the day, we'll never get to the point of renewal. Like anger is neutral. Like, you know what I mean? It's not neutral, excuse me. Anger is an emotion that just shows us what we care about, you know? And like when it's attached to something beautiful, it produces hope in the heart, and it produces activity. Example, when people were talking about Serenity, like at school, because of her hair, she has locks, and they were saying stuff, I got angry. And you know what I did? I had a conversation. Now, it was a good conversation. It was a very healthy conversation. That was me being passionate and then me attaching it to a good action. But if I just raged and I was like, man, you, and I just kept going, like, what would have happened is my heart would have got cold, and then it would have got calloused, and I would have never moved to the point of actually trying to produce change. And so I think we do both. I think we actually suffer well. We give shoulders to lean on, for people to cry on. We give tears, but then we also give truth. We push towards the ideal that says God has the last say on humanity and the future. And what's coming is infinitely better than what is. It's infinitely better than what is. But what's coming isn't this distant thing that we just let stay over there. The way the scriptures speak about eternity is that it invades the everyday. And so we fight towards it. We push towards it. Needs to be further discussed without jumping too quick to the justifying response. Can you build that out? I know you said we'll talk to it later, but if you wanted to build that out, that'd be good. So I could engage with that content so other people can engage with as well. Because again, this is a shared conversation. While we're waiting for that, if Jesus was alive today, how do you think he would respond? Oh man, yeah. I feel like there's two schools of thought that I've just seen. People who speak for Jesus without humility, and then people who are so timid they don't speak for him at all. And it's just like the word of God speaks for itself. And so obviously we have to do good hermeneutics. Good hermeneutics to me is understanding the exegetical truth, the truth of the text. But the truth of the text is not to divorce what's going on from humanity. Like the scriptures were written by God through people in real life situations. And so oftentimes when we do hermeneutical work, try to unpack the truth of the text, we divorce it from its emotional context. We divorce it from its social context. We divorce the human element from the text. And I don't think that's wise. But that's a whole nother conversation. Nevertheless, if we just have good hermeneutics and we just walk through the story of God, I think we would come to this conclusion of what Jesus would do. He would sit with those who are hurting. He would push towards a better future, and he would die. That's the God. He dies. He would lay down his life for a glorious future. Death looks different depending on the situation. What does it look like to lay down your life in this situation? To die to self, if you will, to Philippians 2, to kenosis, to empty oneself. That's a situational reality. But what's substantive, that crosses over situations is that there you are laying down your life for the purpose of restoration. You are laying down your life for a better future. You are laying down your preferences for something that's more excellent. You are laying down because you're being led by love. That's the substance that transcends the situation. Now, how you apply that situationally, man, I think that's the nature of wisdom. I think that's the gift of the body, to be able to engage with other voices to kind of get a full picture, a well-rounded picture of what God is doing, who God is, and how he might act, and then to apply that substantive love lays down, love limits liberties, love goes without for the sake of something else to a situation. So in this case, I think that for me, one of the ways that I am laying down right now is by not staying quiet. Like, I was starting to see myself just be like, yo, like, I'm tired. I don't got time to engage with people. Man, we're in COVID. People are suffering. I don't. This ain't worth my time. But that was from a place of selfishness, and honestly fear. Going back to that first question of not wanting to get like boxed into some caricature. But I honestly don't care. Like, people who know me know me. If you don't know me, that is what it is. You're going to have some picture of me. That's fine. I can't control that. Like, truth is a shield that protects us, and it also fights for us. And so, I mean, I'm just not going to worry about trying to protect like the Lord has me. And so, so for me, love was to actually get on and do something like this, to hit up people in our team and just be like, yo, like, hey man, I feel like sharing. I know that we would do this if it wasn't for COVID. What are ways that we could create space to have a conversation? I think for other people, I think love looks like redemptive listening. It looks like seeking to understand as opposed to being understood. It looks like, how can I just grab somebody who's suffering right now, and I just say, man, tell me what's going on. Help me understand what's going on in your heart. And just listening. I think some people, the most loving thing you could do right now would be to lay down your preconceptions, to lay down your theological aptitude, and to listen to somebody. Like, Diamond's been doing a whole bunch of virtual coffees where she'll just grab coffee, like, we'll brew it. Shout out to Crew Coffee with Brian and Ashley, and she'll just Zoom somebody and they'll just have coffee and they'll talk. And so I just think laying stuff down, being silent, and just listening well. How can black women practically support and affirm the black men in their lives during an age that seems to devalue their very worth consistently? No, I said earlier that I think the math is that for every one black or brown body that is a victim of injustice, it seems like there's dozens of black or brown people that walk away from Jesus. And I mean that. That's just looking at the stats over the last 7 years in particular, where it feels like because everything is out in public, there's just more visceral responses. And what I've seen all the more that's causing people to walk away, it isn't just the full out denial of Jesus. It's the offer of dignity that other systems provide. There's something intoxicating about being told that you matter. Like it does something to us emotionally and spiritually. And when somebody could look at a black man who is regularly told by systems that they don't matter unless they fit a particular type, that, yo, brother, you have inherent dignity. You were a king. man, that just changes everything. And so to answer your question, Jess, what can you do? I think as women, I think it's just speaking the truth in love. It's by being generally encouraging as well as specifically and uniquely encouraging. Generally, man, the reality of the Imago Dei needs to be recovered. That every human being was made in the image of God. God's signature is on their soul. His fingerprints are all over their lives. They have value that can never be erased by activity. No amount of sin will erase my inherent dignity. Period. Period. Value. Yeah, value. And so to generally just constantly say, man, like, you mattered. I just think that's good. But then also specifically to like figure out how people receive love, how people receive affirmation, and then to share it. Because often we exist in generalities, and we exist in like this ambiguous day and ambiguous people. And the more that we could get from ambiguity to specificity, like not try and love this general weird avatar person, but actually have names and faces and stories that we're attached to, connected to, that we love, like the better. And so it would be actually understanding who are those people in your life, what makes them tick, where are they, and then be able to speak to that in a personal, unique way. It's 8:09. We're going to probably go for another 15, 20 minutes. More questions. Ooh, Cortland. Cortland is the future, guys. If you don't know about him, he's on here. You should follow him. He is the future. Conversations need to be had in a proactive and not wait till the next tragedy. Absolutely. That takes a level of courage that and humility that's often just not experienced, because we just don't live in healthy community, so we don't feel the freedom to risk by having proactive conversations. But I agree with you, bro. Yes, Brittany, the reaction of most white Christians does not help. I would affirm that 1,000% without speaking in generalities, though. But there is a sense to where it feels like at times like black and brown believers are expected to both mourn and then educate simultaneously. So it's like, I need to mourn what's going on, but then I also need to educate you as I'm mourning. And that's just like, that's not fair. Like, that's not loving to make me have to do both at the same time. Just isn't loving. But that's what often feels like is the case. Do you think Christianity allows us to understand this time that we're facing with COVID-19? Absolutely. I think that Acts 17 says that the allotted periods of our time, where we live, when we live, are not by accident, but they're by design. And the design of every single period in history is to move us closer to knowing God, to seeing him as the creator of all things and the beautiful, redeeming Savior who comes in, lives a life of grace, and then dies for the sake of a future that's worth fighting for. So I think it speaks to every time. And one of the ways I think it speaks to COVID right now is it forces us to be reminded of how fragile humanity actually is. The world is being brought to its knees by disease. We are not gods. We make terrible gods, but it's very enticing to continue to be God, to try and set ourselves up as ultimate. And so I think it's speaking to that. It's showing our fragility, but it's also showing the potential, our collective potential, when we move past selfishness, like to just watch the way people are serving, and like it's something beautiful. Like the hope is that it will exist beyond this moment, but the hope is also that Christians would continue to lead the way, that we would lead the way on sacrificial service, that we would not just wash our hands, but we would wash other people's feet. We would serve we would step in and provide PPE for people who need it, that we would provide food for the disenfranchised, that we would provide resources if we have, that we would give of our time, talent, and treasure. What do you think the role of that looks like? Predictive text, like, so predictive text will ruin your life. So it's allyship, but I don't know if that's actually what you were trying to say, Daniela. So you may have to repeat that. Brook, okay, what is this? What does freedom to risk look like? Man, I think freedom to risk looks like having honest conversations. Hey man, I feel X, I feel Y. I think it actually looks like moving with action, like doing something. If the question is where does freedom to risk come from, that's a different question. I think freedom to risk comes from relational security. Relational security is both horizontal and vertical. Like, it's vertical in the sense that Romans 8:1 means that there's no condemnation for anyone who's in Christ Jesus. Like, so no one is going to punish me for my sin in a way that damns my soul to hell. I'm free. There's no more condemnation eternally, but there's also a removal of certain experiences of condemnation, like shame. And so there's a relational security that we have vertically if we know Jesus. But there's not just a relational security like vertically that we need. We need to possess a horizontal relational security. Like, I had me and Noah this morning, iReady is, man, this is a monster. And so he had an iReady diagnostic today, and man, he rushed through it. But because he's smart though, he rushed an A. And I was like, my dude, we don't rush excellence, bro. And so we sat him down, and I had a conversation with him, and we were talking about like how we have to do what we must before what we want, and how he's kind of gotten into this pattern where his mind is like, I just got to get past all of this school stuff and all of this room stuff so I can go play games. I want to play Sonic Dash. And so because it was a reoccurring conversation, we were like, yo, I was like, no, I'm taking all of the games off the iPad. You would have thought that I grounded him for eternity. Like, I mean, it was madness. But out of that, I told him to go take a shower, just go breathe, like relax. And then we talked. I sat him down on the couch, and I was like, Noah, like, are you sad right now? He's like, yes. And he's like, does Daddy love you? He's like, absolutely. I'm just sad, Dad. He knew that no matter what happened, our love for him was not at stake. There was a security that he experienced relationally, if that makes sense. And so relational security creates the freedom for risk. Now, we should have it vertically with God. That's the gospel. But the implications of the gospel should challenge us to have it horizontally as well, where we have relationships that don't feel like they're fragile and fickle, so that we have to be perfect. We have to walk on eggshells at every turn and every corner. But we have relational security so that we could risk. We can have hard conversations, and we can make mistakes. That's real, bro. That's real. Injustice and wrong, I can see that. Even though I'm Latino, I struggle because I can relate to racism, prejudice done to me. My wife feels a burden of the future brown or baby girl we're gonna have. Yeah, man. Yeah, we're gonna get some time, bro. Once this COVID stuff is, unless you want to meet in person with masks, I think I'm about to maybe go start doing that. In-person mask meetings. But man, parenting is a monster already. But then you add the dynamic of feeling like there's just stuff that you're not going to be able to protect your kids from, and there's an extra layer of tension that they're going to experience. Man, that's just hard, man. That's just hard stuff. Parenting already feels like you're powerless yet responsible. But then you add that layer of feeling like that there's an environment that is against your children. Yeah, that's hard. That's hard, man. Guys, we got time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. I don't know if you heard the door knocking. That was Noah. He was like, I'm over here like hiding out in this room, like leave it alone. But we got time for one more before we wrap it up. Thursday, we're gonna have another conversation. My man Rich Perez is gonna be on. He's a monster. He's Rich is that dude. But if there's no more questions, going once. I feel like that. I don't really do altar calls, but this feels like there. Is there one? Oh, Shalabosa. Steve Miller is my guy. Steve Miller is one of the bishops of Miami. Like, did you just see? Let me, I don't know if y'all can read. I can see the stuff. I don't know if y'all can see the stuff. I think you can see the stuff. I am as white as they come. Yes, you are, Steve Miller. But when the media tries to pull out some issue from a victim's past in order to justify their crime, it enrages me as it robs the dignity of the victim, regardless of race. Preach that, Steve Miller. Preach that. That is so good. And first of all, for Steve, for you to get on here, man, thank you, brother. Been praying for you. We'll continue to pray for you, man. And for you to just lay out that bomb. Yes. Yes. But it goes back to we have a deficient view of humanity. We do. And it's because we have a deficient view of God and God's plan. And so Christians do have the answer, but there is such a thing as common grace. And you don't need to be Christian to know that you shouldn't be racist. I don't know why that's confusing. Like, and so we get, like, Christians, we get weird with stuff. Like, yo, common grace says don't kill black people if you're white. Like, you know, like, that's just, like, don't kill somebody else because they're a different skin tone from you, because they're from a different culture. Like, you don't need to be theologically savvy to be able to know that that's a problem. And so we're just going to close with that, because I may just start saying stuff that's going to get me in trouble. Guys, thank you for joining us. Hopefully this was edifying for you. I saw some of the comments. Send some questions. Feel free to DM me. Email us, muche@thebrookmiami.org. Your questions, so that come Thursday we could wrestle again. Rich will be on here. I'm just gonna probably be more of like asking questions and facilitating, because when you're in the presence of people who are wise, you just shut up and let them talk. And so, love you guys. I'm praying for you guys. Be easy.